In the darkest shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
In the extreme northwestern corner of South Vietnam, there stands a monument to the free world. Unlike those which commemorate the victories of past wars, this one was not built on marble or bronze, but the sacrifices of men who fought and died at a remote outpost to halt the spread of communism. This is the story of those men, the defenders of Khe Sanh, in the epic 77-day struggle, which not only denied the North Vietnamese Army a much-needed victory, but reaffirmed to the world the intention of the United States to hold the line in Southeast Asia. In addition to having been a contest of men and machines, it was a test of a nation's will. It comes from a Battle for Khe Sanh by Captain Moyers S. Shore, the 2nd United States Marine Corps. History and Museums Division, Headquarter, U.S. Marine Corps, Washington, D-fucking-C.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy.
And voodoo.
Violence.
All right, welcome to the Abercast. I'm John Towers. Thank you guys for tuning in. I love you all. Thank you. I appreciate the time that you give me every week or a couple of days, whatever. We got a lot to talk about tonight, so I'm going to get going. I'd like to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes or, wherever. I'd like to encourage everyone to check out the website. It's stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com. At the bottom, there are links to all my various social medias. Please go ahead and find me, talk to me, holler at your boy. I'll clap back at you. I don't know what any of that means. Patreon, you can check out the Patreon page. We're trying to get a Books for Soldiers program going. So you go there, you find it's also great. It's a reason for me to get the oath printed out on some mason jars and share them with everybody. So, that's it. My state of mind right now is, I guess I'm just in kind of like a Vietnam mode, because over the weekend, my wife and I went camping and it was rainy the whole time. So rain, no one was shooting at us, but it definitely had like a just a grimy, humid feel to it. So we are going to be talking about the Vietnam War, the Battle of Khe Sanh today. So besides all the context, the little bit of context we're gonna get into, if this topic interests you, you go back and check out the RFK episodes, the Pentagon Papers episode, the William Colby episode, Missing POWs episode. I'm trying to think if there's any more. So on the website, there's also going to be a new thing under the Abercast page. There's going to be something called Featured Series. So I'm trying to collect all of these things together for you, so you don't have to hunt through the catalog. You can, if you're interested in this topic, or what we've been talking about as far as Vietnam's concerned, you go to the Featured Series section under the Abercast tab, and I'll have those collected right there for you, so you don't have to hunt through there. Because I imagine you guys that like this might not like all the black magic stuff or the conspiracy stuff. I don't really know. So I'm just trying to make it easy for you guys to find these tertiarily or directly referenced episodes. So look for that there. Hopefully it'll be up and running by the time this episode hits. Right now I want you guys to grab a mason jar. I want you to fill it up with ice. And then I want you to take a lime slice and put it in there. And then I want you to get the cheapest gin you can find and put 2 shots of gin into your mason jar, and then fill the rest of it up with like diet tonic water. Pay attention to what I'm saying to you, though. This is not a drink recipe. This is a formula for a weapon of mass distraction. So go ahead, grab that mason jar, charge up your gin jihads, and we're going to get right into this. Wait, what? Forgive me. Like, what is all that? Dien Bien Phu, the fall of the French Indochina, 1954. This comes right from the department, the government, history.state.gov. I found this. I didn't even know this thing existed, but I found it. It is pretty awesome. In the late 40s, the French struggled to control its colonies in Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Despite financial assistance from the United States, nationalist uprisings against French colonial rule began to take their toll. On May 7, 1954, the French held garrison at Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam fell after a 4-month siege led by the Vietnamese nationalist Ho Chi Minh. After the fall of Dien Bien Phu, the French pulled out of the region, concerned about regional stability, and the United States became increasingly committed to countering communist nationalists in Indochina. The United States would not pull out of Vietnam for another 20 years. So you are probably like, what the fuck is this guy talking to me about a Vietnam War battle? But I'm talking to you about a 1954 thing that happened. So any discussion about Khe Sanh should include what went down at Dien Bien Phu. Because it was the blueprint for what happened at Khe Sanh. It's what the northern Vietnamese communists were trying to do. So in early 54, the French army was encamped at Dien Bien Phu, a heavily fortified base located deep in a valley and near communications links on the Laotian border. By mid-March, it was clear that the French were struggling under a Viet Minh siege, and the only outside intervention in the form of fresh troops or an airstrike could save them. Though President Eisenhower was determined to prevent communist victory in Vietnam, the U.S. Congress and officials and administration were equally determined not to intervene unless they could do so as part of a larger coalition. Britain and other members of NATO declined to participate in rescuing what they thought to be was a lost cause. Dien Bien Phu fell in May, and the French retreated from Vietnam. So this was the battle that broke the political will of France. And that's what, when we start looking actually at the topic for this evening, when we start looking at Khe Sanh, this is what they were trying to do to the will of the United States. So what do I mean when I say it broke the political will of the French? Well, I don't have it in front of me. I don't have it prepared, but I constantly talk. It's probably made a few of you sick from time to time. But I talk about Sun Tzu in The Art of War, and Sun Tzu in the Art of War talks about how everything is political, even warfare is political. And the idea, is kind of like an idea that we've lost track of in modern warfare, where we're like, it's the hearts and minds, it's the hearts and minds. Where in the old days or whatever, I don't want to say the old days, classical, maybe police action, a classical warfare action, the idea is, you have to break the political will of your enemy. Everything is politics, and even warfare. Warfare is just as much political as diplomacy is. A lot of people nowadays will bristle at a comment or a sentence like that. So I look to the bombing of Dresden. You will constantly people will talk about, the Americans, bombing Dresden and how there was no military target in Dresden. Well, you know what? They were trying to end the fucking war. And if enough Germans were like, let's just end this fucking thing, eventually you would be able to leverage that political war. We don't even have to take it back that far. Think about Vietnam. Think about what was happening domestically during the Vietnam conflict. During the Vietnam conflict, a number of loud activists turned the public sentiment against Vietnam. We wound up winning it, and then we wound up winning it. You can tune into the Pentagon Papers episode for that. All right, so back to this thing. In the wake of the French defeat, the French and Vietnamese, along with representatives from the United States and China, met in Geneva in mid-54. The discussion of the future of Indochina, they reached two agreements. First, the French and Viet Minh agreed to a ceasefire and temporary division of the country along the 17th parallel. French forces would remain in the south, and Ho Chi Minh's forces would control the north. The second agreement promised that neither the north nor the south would join alliances outside other parties, and called for general elections in 56. Laos and Cambodia were to remain neutral. We will see that Laos does not remain neutral. The United States did not sign the second agreement, establishing instead its own government in South Vietnam. The French pulled out. The United States stepped in and appointed Ngo Dinh Diem. The RFK episode we talk about gets all into Diem. He was tapped to lead South Vietnam. Diem also collaborated with Japanese occupation, but his Catholicism appealed to Western powers. So this is the guy, basically we set up a puppet government, and this guy was willing to do whatever we wanted, pretty much. And we funded him, and it was working real well. At the time, we only had some special forces guys in. So whenever you see special forces dudes in, what you are looking at is, the majority of the time, what you're looking at is they're training counterinsurgents. They're training indigenous people. That's what special forces do. So at the time we had this guy was in power. We had some special forces dudes, and we had CIA guys running around with suitcases full of money, and they were organizing this resistance. Now what happened when Kennedy was put in office, and he basically wound up greenlighting Diem for no reason. So they staged a coup. Diem, who was our dude, our guy on the ground, we installed him. He was our dude. He was doing exactly what we want him to do. Kennedy wound up greenlighting a coup and killing this guy. And that very quickly escalated to where we needed to put boots on the ground. I detail all of this. I think it's in the RFK episode. The United States, I already said they did not sign the second agreement. So, like I said, any discussion about Khe Sanh, we need to kind of start at Dien Bien Phu. It'll come up again a little bit later. They were trying to achieve the same goal. In 1968, in the northwest corner of South Vietnam, this mountainous jungle is this valley of Khe Sanh, and it was made up by a series of hills. See, that's another thing about Dien Bien Phu, is the French were based in a valley. So in Khe Sanh, it was made up of a mountainous terrain. There is a Khe Sanh Valley, and there's a river that cut the valley into the earth. But there's a series of they call them hill structures, that ultimately overlook this road, this Route 9, and in the area. Route 9 now runs from Laos to almost the coast of Vietnam. So it's very important. It's a very important roadway. And Khe Sanh is actually super close to the demilitarized zone at the time. So when we talk about why the northern Vietnamese attacked Khe Sanh in the first place, a couple of these things are going to come into play. One is because it would put the demilitarized zone into play. The other thing is that it would put this Route 9 into play. Another thing is that we'll see is when the Marines took over these hilly areas, instead of putting their base on the valley, they put them on the high ground on these hills. So it gave them basically control over the whole valley. In April of 1967, the battalion of Marines surprised an enemy element in the area, and that led to a battle a battle ensued that led to these Marines seizing control of hills. I'm just going to say it doesn't really mean anything, but this is going to come up over and over again. It let them seize control of hills 861, 881 South, and Hill 950. That's the hold music while I do this. The Battle for Khe Sanh by Captain Moyers S. Shore II. This is where the cold open came from. It's the same book. Thus, the hill fights ended, and the first major attempt by the NVA to take Khe Sanh was thwarted. All intelligence reports indicated that a badly mauled 325C NVA division had pulled back to lick its wounds, ending the immediate threat in western Quang Tri province. With the pressure relieved for the time being, General Walt began scaling down his forces at Khe Sanh because the next phase of the enemy's winter-spring offensive involved a drive through the coastal plain towards Dong Ha. From 11 to 13 May, 126, which is an element of the Marines, moved to the combat base in the adjacent hills to relieve the 3rd Division Marines, or the 3D Marines. By evening of the 12th, 2-3, which is an element of Marines, have airlifted to Dong Ha on the 1 artillery battery, Bravo 1st of the 12th, I guess. I don't know how the Marines say this stuff, so I'm just kind of trying my best. Was pulled out by convoy. The following day, the 3-3 also returned to Dong Ha by truck. In the meantime, Company Alpha 126 was lifted to Hill 881 South, while Company Charlie took up position on Hill 861. Company Bravo 126 and skeleton headquarters of the 26th Marines arrived and remained at the base, as did fresh artillery battery A Alpha 113 at 1500 on 13 May. Colonel John Padley, commanding officer of the 26th Marines forward, relieved Colonel Lanigan as the senior officer present in Khe Sanh. In his analysis of the operation, Colonel Lanigan reported that his men had been engaged in a conventional infantry battle against well-trained, highly disciplined, and well-entrenched enemy force. In the past, NVA had used phantom tactics when engaging U.S. forces. Not so at Khe Sanh. A maze of bunker complexes served as... So what they're saying is... Other places where in other skirmishes, they were doing this thing called harassing, where it's common. Sun Tzu talks about it. When you have a smaller force, but you still want to provoke your enemy into movement. You use your smaller force to harass. So this would be basically like stepping up, taking a couple shots, getting the attention, then fading back in. You can use it, especially if your opponent has hubris or is quick to temper, as Sun Tzu points out with examples. So these complexes served as a grim reminder of their determination to stay and fight. They openly challenged the Americans to push them off the hills, and the 3D Marines rose to the occasion. The fierce resistance was overcome by aggressive infantry assaults in coordination with artillery and close air support, which according to Colonel Lanigan was the most accurate and devastating he had witnessed in 3 wars. The communists had anticipated a bloodletting, and they received one. From 24 April through 12 May 1967, the NVA lost 940 confirmed kills. Even for the North Vietnamese, that was a massive defeat which could not be easily absorbed. But the leaders in Hanoi were committed to a course of action which traded human lives for strategic expediency. Just like the monsoon rains, the enemy would come again. By December of 1967, intelligence reports come in that 2 whole northern Vietnamese divisions were assembling in Khe Sanh and preparing for an assault. A decision was made to defend the base. General William Westmoreland made the decision that they were going to stand and fight. Sometimes when you do research on this, on Khe Sanh, a lot of folks say that the area had held no strategic value. That they were just basically like, hey, you want to fight Americans? This is where we are. And however, I think that is... I don't agree with that because of this Route 9 and because the demilitarized zone was so close. I think. But I just wanted to bring that up just as a point. So these guys, these Marines, start digging in, and they start securing their defenses. They bring in these Navy combat engineers, or the Navy calls them Seabees, to start digging trenches, building bunkers, and start training and moving in air support. So these engineers start building an airstrip, and eventually what we're going to find out is that this airstrip is super important. They start flying in reinforcements, and they start to fly in supply. They're putting surplus in, and another thing they start doing is they start training their pilots to do supply drops from airplanes, so they don't even have to touch down. Like, they just fly airplanes over and push out supplies to these hills where they're needed. And this winds up being a clutch situation. Clutch situation indeed. Sending more units to help repel the oncoming attack. They needed to strike a balance between how many men was needed to defend the positions and how many men it could possibly supply. So we're going to talk for a second about logistics. Do I want to take a break before I get into this? Yeah, I am going to take a break. So hang tight, and then we're going to get into the role of logistics in this whole Khe Sanh situation. So here we go. So there's this age-old adage that's attributed to General Omar Bradley, and it says, amateurs talk about tactics and professionals talk about logistics. So I think a lot of times, and I think I'm guilty of this too, when I tell these war stories or these military history stories on the podcast, I tend to focus on, the actual actions or the tactics. So I thought this would be a perfect example how to talk about the logistics train and how it's important. So tactics, just quick definition, tactics are like the art of deploying armed forces in order of battle and organizing operations, especially contact with the enemy. Where logistics would be more defined as simply it's getting those elements, the means and the shit that they need to win this battle with the enemy. So I was thinking about an example to put it in perspective. So I think I have a pretty good example, and it's something that we've seen in movies and probably in real life a bunch of times. So that's why I'm going to use this one. So think about a SWAT team that's assaulting a building, or like they're in a hallway and they're breaching an apartment. So we all seen what they do. They all stack up. They have one shoulder against the wall. The wall that the door that they're going to be busting in is on, and they stack up. So we'll just say there's 6 of them or 7 of them, whatever. So they stack up, and towards the end or towards the middle of the stack is the dude with like the battering ram or the hammer. This is the breach guy. So he's this element, and they keep him in the middle because everyone else has their rifle at the ready, where his is probably like slung over his back because his main task for this phase of the movement of the mission is to breach the door when he's called up. So they all stack up, and you'll see they all use their non-firing arm, their non-trigger hand, and they'll put it on the guy in front of them's shoulder. Now, the reason they do this is because they can communicate silently with this. So they stack up, they put their hand on the shoulder. When the last guy is ready and he's in position, he'll squeeze. And then that squeeze is like a wave in a stadium. It'll go all the way up. So the guy up front, the guy that's calling the shots, because he's actually in the most danger. He's in the most dangerous spot. So the wave of hands, the squeeze comes up to him, and he's like, okay, he's ready. So he calls up he uses hand signals or whatever, and he calls up the breach dude, and the breach guy will come up. The last guy in the thing also has his weapon trained for behind. He's doing rear security. But he's still doing the hand on the shoulder squeeze. So it goes all the way up. The first dude calls up the breach man. The breach man comes up, and they have some sort of hand signal where they're like, okay, 1, 2, 3. I don't know. Do I go on 3, or is it 3 and then go? This is the famous Murtaugh Riggs question. So they do the hand signal. The breach guy busts the door in, and then he takes a security position while the fire team enters the room. Okay, so let's just stop before they enter the room. Let's just stop. So there's 7 dudes. What do they have? They have body armor. They have weapons. If it was a comic book, they would have, a pistol and their rifles. If they were a regular army person, they would only have a rifle or a pistol, one or the other. They have bullets. They have extra magazines. They have gear. You see these pictures of these SWAT team cops. They're like, oh, we get to bust a door down. Hold on, I need to get into a fucking RoboCop costume. It's like they got like knee pads, elbow pads. They have driver hatch operator gloves. Special optics. They have radios. They have boots. They have zip ties in case they can get someone on the ground and take them prisoner. They have shoelaces. They have extra magazines. They have a hammer or a ram. You get it. They have a lot of bullshit. So that would be the tactical side of it. So the logistical side of it would be, the logistical side of that mission would be transportation. You have to figure out a vehicle for these guys to ride in. You'd have to make sure that vehicle has gas. You have to make sure that vehicle is operable. You have to make sure that the tires on that vehicle are slick or whatever. They have enough tread on them. You have to have fuel. You might want to have escorts if it's a shady part of town and they're going to need backup. You might want to have a couple cruisers go with them. You have to organize that. You have to make sure you have the cruisers on hand. You have to make sure those cops are armed. You have to make sure there's fuel in that. You have to, you might want to make sure that there's medical support. If you're going in hot, you want to make sure at least, if one of your cops get drilled, there's an ambulance with an EMT crew waiting. You want to make sure you might want to make sure there's air support, like the ghetto bird, doom, 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 boom, boom, doom, doom, doom. In case someone rabbits, you want to have eyes in the sky so you could see if someone rabbits, you can track them down. You want to make sure you actually have a perimeter set up. I didn't even think about that. You want to know the traffic routes. You might want to have a staging area set up so you can link up and brief with all these other ancillary people. If you have like someone from the electric company there so they could cut power, you might want to have all of this stuff. So, in what we're talking about, to put this all in perspective, imagine that you want those same 7 dudes to knock on a door just like that across the Pacific Ocean in a mountainous jungle region, surrounded by communists that want to kill them. Hostile communists. Now, you have to think about the logistics you have to think about what the infrastructure it would take to get all of those dudes, all of that equipment to the location where they need to go. So we're talking about boats, we're talking about sailors, we're talking about fuel, mops, maintenance, You're talking about ports, fixing up ports that, for a major military operation like the Vietnam War, we had to basically go over there and take these shitty ports that we had to install cranes. We had to build some, take cement, build ports, build piers to that could handle the load, the military equipment that's moving this stuff. From the ports, we got to talk about roads, road repair, road maintenance, road upkeep. These dirt roads in Vietnam probably couldn't, might not have been able to safely service a deuce and a half or a 5 ton. That's how you're going to move it. You need to think about planes, pilots, fuel, parachutes, maintenance, helicopters, pilots, fuel, maintenance, straps, all this stuff, building airstrips, like they're doing, like in the story, they're going to be doing it at Khe Sanh. They're going to build these, they're going to build and improve on these airstrips to help with this supply train that we're talking about, this logistics train. So I think everybody gets it at this point. I hope I didn't spend too much time talking about that. Sometimes you throw these words around and you're not sure if people will understand it. Tactics, logistics, whatever. You point the gun this way and you run towards the door. There's a lot, there's a lot more into it. And we're not even really mentioning, training or picking which unit does what. Like that's kind of like a command and control issue. Once those decisions are made, that's when you have to start looking. And hell, I didn't even mention food. You got to figure out how to get food to these people when, while they're transporting, the people transporting, the sailors, the pilots. You have to figure out how to keep those people fed, how to make sure there's medical attention available for those fucking people. Like it's an in-depth thing, and you could see where Omar Bradley was coming from, where he's like, amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics. That's the same thing as like, lieutenants and captains talk about tactics, and general officers talk about logistics. Like, it's a giant thing, and it plays such an important role when we're talking about this. I mean, imagine if like the siege of Vienna, or like imagine the siege of Jerusalem, how that could have gone different if those people had pilots that knew how to do supply dumps and C-130s. Like, it's just crazy. That's what they were getting into. They were planning on being surrounded, and they were like, how can we hold these fucking hills for as long as we can? And like, we're going to need stuff. We're going to need a lot of stuff. So they were prepping for this siege. This logistics or this supply train was important. Building the airstrip was important. The whole time this was all going on, these Marines were actually still patrolling, and they would go out and they would encounter skirmishes. These enemies would be probing and harassing, and in some cases they would actually be targeting communication antennas and stuff, trying to see if they could disrupt the communications. If you had 3 different like outposts, on hills in the same area, and you could cut off communications, but on one of them, well, guess which one of them is going to get attacked, bro? You know what I'm saying? So here, during December, there was another surge of enemy activity. Reconnaissance teams reported large groups of NVA moving into the area, and this time they were not passing through, they were staying. There was an increased number of contacts between Marine patrols and enemy units. The companies on Hills 881S, that's 881 South, and 861 began receiving more and more sniper fire. Not only the hill outposts, but the combat base itself received numerous probes along the perimeter. In some cases, the defensive wire was cut and replaced in such a manner that the break was hard to detect. That's creepy. Knowing that they're among you, knowing that they could just get in and you couldn't even tell the wire was breached. January 2nd, 1968, a squad from Lima 326, headed by Second Lieutenant Niall B. Buffington, was dispatched to investigate. Earlier in the day, the squad had rehearsed the proper procedure for relieving the listening post and had received a briefing on fire discipline. The training was shortly put to good use. Lieutenant Buffington saw 6 men were dressed like Marines, and while no friendly patrols were reported in the area, he challenged the strangers in clear English to be sure. There was no reply. A second challenge was issued, and this time the lieutenant saw one of the men make a motion as if going for a hand grenade. The Marines opened fire and quickly cut down 5 of the 6 intruders. One enemy soldier died with his finger inserted in the pin of a grenade. The awesome hitting power of the M16 rifle was quite evident, since all 5 men were apparently dead by the time they hit the ground. The lone survivor was wounded but managed to escape after retrieving some papers from a map case which was on one of the bodies. Using a sentry dog, the Marines followed a trail of blood to the southwest but gave up the hunt in the darkness. The direction the enemy soldier was headed led the Marines to believe that his unit was located beyond the rock quarry. The importance of this contact was not realized until later, when intelligence personnel discovered that 5 of the enemy dead were officers, including an NVA regimental commander, operations officer, communications officer. The fact that the North Vietnamese would commit such key men to high level of highly dangerous personal reconnaissance indicated that Khe Sanh was back at the top of the communist priority. On 19 January 1968, the 3rd Platoon 1326 was patrolling along ridgeline 700 meters southwest of Hill 881 North, where 2 days before, a Marine reconnaissance team had been ambushed. The team leader and radio man were killed, and while the bodies had been recovered, the radio and a coded frequency card was missing. The 3rd Platoon was scouring the ambush site for these items when it was taken under fire by an estimated 25 NVA troops. The Marines returned fire and broke contact while friendly artillery plastered enemy positions. As the element on the right... this is an escalation of these skirmishes. As the element, so we're joining this in the middle of in the middle of one of these little skirmishes. As the element on the right moved forward after a precautionary 105 millimeter artillery concentration, the enemy opened up small arms, 50 caliber machine guns and grenade launchers. The resistance was so stiff that Captain Dabney ordered Lieutenant Brindley to hold up his advance and call for more artillery, while a force on the left pushed forward far enough to place flanking fire on NVA positions. In the Boudica episode, Hell Has No Wrath, I explain an L-shaped ambush, and I explain flanking. That's what they're doing. They're trying to swing. They're trying to swing out so they can catch. So they can apply fire from the side, and this other element can provide fire from the front, engage the enemy and fire from 2 sides. Push forward far enough. Okay, the 1st and 2nd platoons, however, fared no better. Volleys of machine gun fire from other enemy-owned hills cut through the Marine ranks like a giant scythe. And in less than 30 seconds, 20 men were out of action, most with severe leg wounds, caught in crossfire. The captain ordered Frome to hold and evacuate his wounded. Again, Lieutenant Brindley's men on the right surged forward in the wake of 155 millimeter prep fires, and the assault, as described by one observer, was, quote, was like a, quote, page out of the life of Chesty Puller, unquote. Chesty Puller was a general Lewis B. Chesty Puller. He was a legendary Marine in history. He was the only Marine to have won the Navy Cross 5 times. Brindley was everywhere. He moved from flank to flank, slapping his men on the back and urging them on. The lieutenant led his platoon up the slope and was the first man on top of the hill, but for him, the assault ended there. He was cut down by a sniper bullet and died within minutes. As a footnote, Lieutenant Brindley was also posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Yeah, so these skirmishes just kind of went on and on. There is a note in the report here. Many more North Vietnamese died that night than were found. The stench from the bodies decaying in the jungle around the hill became so strong that the men of Kilo 326 were forced to wear their gas masks for several days. Ugh. All right, and January 20th, an NVA lieutenant defected. This guy's name is La Tan Ton. He defected and he spilled all the beans about the entire plan to attack on 881 South and 861 simultaneously that very evening at 0:30. That's 30 minutes after midnight. An intense enemy mortar and rocket barrage rocked Khe Sanh that night. Hill 861 attacked by 300 North Vietnamese troops. And this is where that note was. Many more North Vietnamese died that night than were found. The stench from those bodies decaying in the jungle around the hill became so strong that the men of Kilo 326 were forced to wear their gas masks for several days. Some men on the hill had a rather unusual way of keeping their spirits up during the fight, as First Sergeant Stephen L. Goddard discovered. First Sergeant had been hit in the neck and was pinching an artery shut with his fingers to keep from bleeding to death. As he moved around the perimeter, the top heard a sound that simply had no place on a battlefield. Somebody was singing. After tracing the sound to a mortar pit, Goddard peered into the emplacement and he found the gunners below bellowing out one stanza after another as they dropped rounds into the tubes. The ammo humpers were also singing as they broke open boxes of ammunition and passed the rounds to the gunners. Naturally, the name of the song was The Marines Hymn. So there's a funny story about this with these specific gunners. I don't know if it was at this point or later on in the battle, but at one time they were putting so much ammo downrange with these mortars that the tubes became red hot, and you can't put a mortar down a red hot tube because it might explode, right? So the guys at first was like, well, first we use the water of our canteens to cool the tubes down. But when that was gone, we broke open our sea rations and we used juice from canned fruit to cool the to cool the tubes down. And then he's like, well, when that was all gone, we got the boys from the platoons lined up, and they would just take turns pissing on these tubes to cool them down, so we could continue to throw these mortars downrange. And I thought that was hilarious and gross at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Burnt piss in a gun tube. The colonel called in massive air and artillery concentrations on points where the enemy would more than likely marshal his reserve. Much of the credit belongs to Lieutenant Colonel Henley's batteries at the base. One infantry officer on Hill 881 South, who observed the fire, described the Marine artillery as, quote, absolutely and positively superb, unquote. Throughout the battle, the North Vietnamese assault commander was heard frantically screaming for his reserves. He never received an answer. The fact that these initial attacks on 861 was not followed up by another effort lent credence to the theory that the backup force was being cut to pieces to the rear while the assault troops were dying on the wire. that seems like a pretty good place to leave it. So if you're interested in this, you want to hear part 2 right away, I'll upload it on to Patreon when I do this. You can go there and check it out, or just like wait a week or so and catch it out and check it on your normal podcast app, whatever, however you listen to the show. I'd like to encourage everyone to rate and review the show. I would like to encourage everyone to check out the website, stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com, and check out Patreon. If you guys will help me send some books to some soldiers, books are heavy, man. I just need help. So check all those out. And yeah, so stay tuned for Soda Jerk Fucking Fight. We're gonna end it just like normal. So see you guys soon with the conclusion of the battle at Khe Sanh. I'm sorry, I didn't actually know this was gonna be 2 episodes, but we're along already. So all right, here you go. Thanks everybody. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Ba 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 boom.
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm, come face to face with an army of magically corrupted, machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
In my darling whiskey, she tightened up her grip, and she made me sick that night. I knew that the whiskey would take up my life. Well, I stand a full 2 inches below 5'9", and every guy here wants to take me alive. So I'll take a shot of whiskey and punch out their lines. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking a shot of whiskey and say goodbye.